It was a cool evening in Vermont. Being mid-October, the colorful fall leaves were in full bloom. Mark and Vanessa lived in a small house in rural Andover. They had a beagle and a cat that they treated just like family. It was almost 11 p.m. and they were getting ready to go to bed. That'd be very early for me. As they were turning out the lights, they heard someone knocking on the door. This was extremely strange, as their nearest neighbor was almost a quarter of a mile away. Their house was set back quite a distance from the main road. That's a big red flag right there. They looked at each other puzzled. They knocked again, this time a little harder and more persistent. The dog yelped and the cat hissed, and they both scurried out of the room. Mark went over to the door to see who it was. As he looked out the peephole, he didn't see anyone. He quickly unlocked it and swung open the door. 2 children were standing on his front porch, looking down. They looked to be about 6 and 12 years old. They had on what looked like corduroy shorts held up with suspenders, a white short-sleeved button-down shirt, and faded, worn dress shoes. They looked to be dressed for summer, even though the temperature outside was in the low 40s. They must be from Alaska or something. Mark asked, "Can I help you?" The older child replied,
"Yes, sir. Will you please help us? We very much need to use your telegraph to inform our parents of our whereabouts."
"Telegraph?" thought Mark as he looked at them baffled.
"Please, sir. We dearly need your assistance."
Mark noticed he spoke very mature for his age. He also noted he had a very robotic tone to his speech. They stood very still and not shivering, even though Mark could clearly see his breath. Mark was a grandfather and wanted to help the children, but couldn't get past the strangeness of the interaction with them. He said, "Wait here." He shut the door and went back inside. He went to the bedroom. Vanessa said, "Who was at the door?" "It's 2 kids. They want to use our telegraph to contact their parents."
"Telegraph?"
Vanessa asked incredulously. "Yeah, and their clothes are very old-timey, like they're Mennonite or Amish." "They're not far from Amish country." Suddenly, there was knocking at the door. This time, much more insistent. Vanessa got up out of bed. "I'll talk to them. You stay here." She walked over to the front door. By this time, they were pounding on the door. She opened it.
"Hello, ma'am. We are very cold and hungry. Will you please allow us to enter your beautiful home and warm up until our parents arrive, please?"
She looked them over intently. They never looked up. All she could see was the top of their black-haired heads. And they weren't trembling from the cold. They just stood there, stoic, with their heads bowed. She said, playing along, "I thought you needed to use my telegraph to call your parents."
"We do. May we please use your telegraph to contact our parents?"
Vanessa had picked up the wireless house phone on the way to the door. She said,
"Sure, here you go,"
and handed the older boy the phone. He held the phone and looked at it. Then said,
"No, I need you to let me inside your house now."
"No, I will not let you inside my house," she exclaimed as she grabbed the phone from the boy's hand. "And since you're being rude, I need you to leave." She slammed the door in the boy's downturned face. Time to call the cops. She started to walk away, but felt guilty about what she had done. She turned back toward the door and opened it to apologize to the youngsters. When she did, they were gone. They were nowhere to be found. They just disappeared. They must be related to David Copperfield. Startled by their sudden absence, she stumbled backward into the living room, slamming the door. Mark came out of the bedroom. "What happened?" "They got very demanding, so I told them to leave and slammed the door. When I went back to apologize for my rudeness, they had disappeared." They shook their heads in disbelief and went to sleep. What? How could you go to sleep after that weirdness? The next day, in another part of town, Ruby and Tony were at a gas station getting some munchies for their all-night Netflix marathon. Munchies, huh? Hee. As they were getting in their car, they noticed two kids staring off in the distance. As he started his car, one of the kids knocked on his window. They were dressed in what looked like period clothes from the 1800s. They had gray-colored skin and both had long bangs covering their eyes. Tony asked, "Yeah, what do you want?"
"Please, sir, we are in need of getting to the bus station. Will you please give us permission to enter your automobile?"
Tony looked at Ruby. She shook her head and put her hands up like, "I don't know." Tony looked back at the children. The older one had raised his head a little bit. Tony could see his eyes through the thick bangs. They were a shiny, solid black. The soulless eyes stared back at him. He felt torn between being terrified and mentally pulled to help them out. He felt a remarkable urge to open his door, as if the child was exercising some kind of mind control. Ruby nudged Tony and whispered, "Come on, let's go. They're creepy as shit." This snapped Tony out of his trance. He rolled up the window and put the car in drive. He got a little away from them and glanced into the rearview mirror. He saw the children had just vanished within seconds. Poof! He hurriedly pulled out of the parking lot onto the two-lane road and sped away. A half-mile down the road, a semi going the other direction suddenly turned into his lane. Before he could react, the massive truck slammed head-on into his car, killing them both instantly. When the police took the report from the trucker, he said he had to swerve to avoid hitting the two children standing in the road. Those little bastards. The next week, in nearby Belmont, 65-year-old Henry was getting ready to go to sleep. As he was shutting everything off and preparing for bed, he heard a knock at the door. He went over to answer it. He was met by two children dressed in outdated clothing, one about 6 or 7 years old, and the other in his early teens. You would think kids knocking on your door in the middle of the night would throw up a few red flags. He asked, "Could I help you?"
Sir, will you please give us permission to enter your abode? We are very hungry and cold.
Henry had been widowed for 5 years and was very lonely. He said, "Sure, come on in," and allowed them to enter. They walked in and stood very still. Henry went to the kitchen to make them some hot chocolate. When he came back out, he noticed they stood by the front door, very robotically. As he held out the cups of hot cocoa to them, they raised their heads to look at him. Their eyes were a glassy, solid black. Terrified, he dropped both cups of the warm drinks, and they shattered on the floor. They turned their heads sideways, looking quizzically at him. Would you like me to contact your parents for you?" he asked nervously.
No, they are already on their way.
This made him quite nervous, and he took a defensive posture. Then he heard a car door slam outside his house. The children stiffly walked outside. He tentatively followed them. He saw a solid black older model car with dark tinted windows parked out front. Two men dressed in black suits, wearing 40s era fedoras and black sunglasses, stood beside the car. "It's the MIB!" The creepy kids got in the back seat. As the man shut the back door, Henry waved to him. The man lowered his sunglasses slightly to look at Henry. The man in black also had black, shiny eyes. Ooh, I wonder if that's their father. He entered the car and they drove off. Henry went back inside the house, and out of nowhere, his nose started to bleed. He got dizzy, lost his balance, and collapsed on the floor where he lied motionless. The following week, the police showed up to do a wellness check and found Henry dead with a pool of dried blood around his nose. The autopsy revealed that he had died of moonburn syndrome, a form of radiation poisoning usually associated with witnesses of alien spacecraft encounters. Then, a few days later, in Barry, Vermont, Bob and Diane were sitting on the back porch enjoying some adult beverages while the kids played in the backyard. It was nearly dusk and time for the kids to come in. As Bob stood up to holler for the kids, he heard them talking to someone. He tried to focus on the dimly lit woods to see who it was. It was a couple of other kids that he'd never seen before. He could hear the unknown children speaking with the boys. He and Diane both walked out to where they were. Why didn't they just yell for them? As they approached the area where they were playing, a bright flash occurred from the woods. It temporarily blinded the couple. Holding his eyes, he frantically yelled for the kids. "Bobby! George! Time to come inside!" He got no response. He quickly blinked his eyes to regain his sight. It took a minute or two, but he got his sight back. Diane desperately called out,
"Boys, where are you?"
Nothing. Bob sprinted to the house, retrieved a couple of flashlights, and returned to Diane. They searched and searched, but couldn't find the kids. Oh man, that ain't good. Completely distraught, they bolted back to the house. As they were calling the police, the boys walked in the back door. What the hell? Their panic quickly faded. Bob asked, "Where did you boys go?" Bobby replied,
"We followed the kids with the weird black eyes. They took us on their spaceship."
Diane spoke up.
"Boys, stop lying. Tell us the truth."
George chimed in.
"We're not lying, Mom. It's the truth. Look."
He held out his arm. On the underside of his forearm was what looked like a round symbol of some sort burned into his skin. Both boys had the same burn on the same spot. So the aliens branded them. Fast forward a couple of weeks. In Randolph, Vermont, Joyce was sitting in her living room with her dog, reading a book. Her dog started growling for no reason. He was looking intently at the front door, his hair standing straight up on his back. "Sick 'em, boy!" A light knock came at the door. The dog yelped and ran out of the room, terrified. That ain't much of a guard dog there. She got up, went to the door, grabbed her Louisville Slugger, and looked through the window beside the door. She saw two children standing motionless facing the door. They were dressed a little strange, but she figured, kids these days. Right? She put the baseball bat back and cautiously opened the door. The taller one spoke stiffly.
"Hello, ma'am. We are lost and cannot find our way home. Can we use a communication device to contact our creators?"
She thought,
"What a strange way to ask, can we use your phone to call our parents?"
But she felt compelled to help them out. "No, don't do it." Almost like she was being mentally forced to assist them, she opened the door and let them in. After they crossed the threshold, they both looked at her emotionless, with their solid black eyes. Then they turned to look at each other for a minute or so, as if telepathically communicating with one another. Uh-oh. She suddenly got lightheaded. The room seemed to start spinning. She felt herself falling as everything faded away into darkness. She wearily opened her eyes in what seemed like mere seconds. She was lying on a hard metal table. A set of bright lights shone down on her from the ceiling, like an operating room. She saw the silhouette of a small, gray being float toward her. Something triggered an instinctual sense of dread, and she could feel the panic building inside of her. Yeah, like an alien abduction. She tried desperately to get up and run, but couldn't move. Something was holding her down, but she wasn't physically restrained. 3 more of these small gray creatures moved closer to the table. One of them placed a tube against her groin. Inside, she was screaming for help, but no sound left her mouth. Within a few minutes, her stomach grew to the size of a basketball. Oh shit! Shortly after, a gray positioned itself between her legs. She felt enormous pressure on her abdomen. Then, the creature rose up, holding a baby. She looked at it as sheer terror gripped every fiber of her being. It was human, but it had solid black eyes. It's a hybrid. It seemed to be crying, but she couldn't hear anything. Well, that is kind of an upgrade. Its head was misshapen, like an upside-down teardrop. At that time, the two children she had encountered earlier entered the room. One of the gray creatures spoke to her telepathically. It told her that they are a dying race that needs an injection of fresh DNA in order to survive. They plan to take over our world by slowly breeding us out and phasing in beings with alien DNA. Over time, the human race will fade away to be replaced by the superior DNA of the gray aliens. It pointed to the children with the pitch black eyes and said, "These are the children of the future.